Hello everyone, it is Jazz here. Today I am doing my April reading wrap-up. It was one of those months where I only read 2 books in the month of April because, I was kind of super tired and thus slow reader syndrome set in. So only 2 books this time, but I do have a lot to say about them, so maybe it's a good thing. So let's jump in to talking about the books read in April. The first book that I completed in the month of April was a reread of the book Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist by Rachel Cohen and David Levithan. This book is a contemporary novel about 2 18-year-old characters named Nick and Nora, obviously. They are both people that have gone through really bad breakups previously, and Nick ends up meeting Nora by this funny way in which he is playing at a venue with his band, and then he asks Nora to be his girlfriend for 5 minutes just so he can avoid his ex-girlfriend. And his friends decide, hey, we really like you, Nora. Will you please take Nick out on the town? So she ends up kind of agreeing to do that, and they go on this kind of awkward adventure / date thing. I'm gonna try really hard not to start ranting about this book, but I feel a rant building up inside, so I'm just gonna warn you that this might get a little ranty. I chose to reread this for the BookTube Rereadathon because the challenge was to read something that you felt conflicted about the first time you read it. I also have been planning to reread it for a really long time just because I keep leaving it on my shelf, thinking that, hey, there were a few things that I liked about it, but then I was like, I don't know if I want to ever reread this, so I thought I need to reread it just to know if I need to keep the book or give it away. While I don't think this is the worst book ever written, it's not a truly terrible book, I do think I have an abundance of issues with it, and I actually had more issues with certain elements of this than I did the first read through. I always like to start with the good things about a book, so I'm gonna go ahead and start with some of the good stuff that I did see in this book even the second time around. I do think that this is a really cohesive, co-written book. I feel like David Levithan and Rachel Cohen do really work well together. I do think their writing styles come across very similar, and it works really well for the story. I could definitely sit and read this in one sitting because it's short, and there is something about it that is compelling and keeps you interested in reading and wanting to see what's going to happen with Nick and Nora and all that stuff. Mostly though, I do feel like I really love how this book mentions music and explores music and really explores the idea of what music can mean to people that are really passionate about their musical taste. And I do quite enjoy Nick and Nora's musical taste, first of all, but secondly, I do think it's really cool how the authors mention songs in the story and how those songs that they mention, if you're familiar with them, do really kind of resonate with the feelings of the characters, which I think was really well done. And also, I think it's a really fun way to actually feel either nostalgia about music that you listen to, or also to discover new music if some of these artists and things like that are not familiar to you. You can maybe go and check them out and listen to them. And I believe there used to be an old website that Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist, the book, had that listed a whole bunch of playlists and things that had to do with the book and songs that were mentioned, and I always found that a really fun element when I first read the book. And I also had fun when I first read the book making a playlist for this book of songs that I thought of when I was thinking of this book, or songs that were mentioned in this book. And I actually did make a playlist on YouTube if you want to check it out. It not only includes those songs that I have put on my original playlist, but it also includes the Trainy Dreamy playlist that the authors made, which is a playlist that Nora wants to create in the book, and that playlist is bomb. All this being said, there are things in this book that bother me immensely. The first time I read this book, I guess I felt like the characters were really quirky and really fun, and in this reread, I just felt like the characters were coming off so pretentious, and I like a pretentious teenager. I'm not one of those people that gets annoyed with it. I think the pretentiousness of Nick and Nora added on to the fact that there is this very, like, should we try to be together, should we not? And the debate of should we try to date or not is so, like, heavily involved and so, like, almost unnecessarily, like, back and forth and wishy-washy, that the two things of, like, their characters being really, like, thinking they're so smart, plus all their, like, inner turmoil was like a mash that did not work well for me, and I actually started to get really annoyed with the characters, especially when Nora was like, I wasted all my youth on my ex-boyfriend, and I was like, honey, you're 18. You have not wasted your youth. You're still young. There's elements in here that I just don't really feel are necessary, and also don't really think fit well in the young adult age group that this book is, you know, suited for. I would say, as kind of a precursor warning, if you're going to pick up this book, that this is probably more in the new adult age group because of some of the content in the story. But I believe when this book came out, like, new adult was not a thing. So, you know, it has to go kind of in the young adult area. There are what you would call a lot of steamy moments in it that I would think that are not quite, like, definitely not right for, like, younger teens, in my opinion. In terms of the steamy moments, I just personally think those things are kind of boring, so I think that could be why those elements are not super my cup of tea. Also, there is quite a bit of strong language in this book, and while it was not as bad as I remember the first time I read this, remembered that there was, like, an F word 6 times on every page, and it's not quite that bad, but I do feel like it is a little excessive just because it still is there to the point of distraction. Like, I feel like they're cursing just to curse. They're not cursing for, like, the sake of realism, if that makes sense. Now, most of my annoyance did come from, like, those two elements and how I felt like the characters were distracting and the, you know, elements and content were kind of distracting from the actual goal I felt was, you know, Nick and Nora trying to find, like, some kind of healing through music and through meeting each other. And I felt like both of those elements did distract from, I think, the author's goal, and it was a very try-hardy to be edgy kind of situation, because I felt like those things weren't there to be, you know, genuine, but they were there to just be edgy. There are also some really weird, just Jazz being nitpicky things that bother me with this book that are probably only things that bother me, but I'm going to go ahead and mention. Nick is a bass player in his band. He plays the bass. And in the book, he's talking about how he's, like, playing chords. And I was like, you don't really traditionally play chords on the bass. You can play chords on the bass, but since you don't necessarily always strum a bass unless there's a necessity for it, or there's a style of music where you're, you know, playing bass guitar with chords, you're usually playing notes on the bass guitar, not chords, because you're the bottom and you're plucking with either a pick or your 2 fingers. So I was like, dude, you're probably not playing chords because you're playing notes on your bass. You could not have Nick quote Dirty Dancing, you know, nobody puts baby in the corner in one chapter, and then in the next chapter or so have him not know who Johnny Castle is, the main character of Dirty Dancing. I'm like, you just quoted the man. How do you not know who he is? Then this book also has this weird way of, like, you know, destroying the innocence of Sound of Music and E.T. It's not intending to, and it's doing it in a very amusing way, but, you know, it's like my inner childhood kind of died a little, which is not the book's fault, but, you know, it's just my worldview. After this mellow, dramatic rant, my conclusion about this book is that I like the concept of this book, but I don't think it's enough to ever make me want to reread it again, and I definitely found more things that I disliked about it in the second read than I felt in the first read, although I did have, like, a great day and a great memory reading it the second time because I got to listen to my playlist and enjoy music and just chill and read a book for a day, and that was great. And I found, like, the experience of reading it in terms of how I read it really fun both times. but that's not enough for me to give it space on my shelf. This is not the worst book ever written. I do think there are some benefits to this book, and I do think it is a fairly interesting read, and I do think it is well suited for someone, if not for me. So I gave this book 3 stars because it is definitely an okay read. Moving on, finally, to my second book that I read in the month of April, and that was Otherland, Mountain of Black Glass by Tad Williams. This is the 3rd book in the Otherland series, it being a series novel and being, later in the series. I can't really summarize it too much, but the basic idea of the Otherland series is that it centers around a virtual reality sort of science fiction world where this is very prominent in the world, and a lot of children have gone into this virtual reality situation and ended up in comas because of this Otherland network, and the heroes, if you will, of the story are trying to figure out a way to stop this from happening and save the children. Otherland book 3 was the bomb. It was such a cool ride, and a lot of this has to do with the fact that although I enjoyed book 1 and 2 quite a bit and really wanted to keep reading because it is such a cool world that Tad Williams has created because it mixes so many genres, I do think that the 3rd book is the first book where you didn't have to worry about world building. A lot of book 1 and 2 are about world building and about introducing all the characters and all the players, and there are quite a few characters. And so, a lot of that was out of the way. All those characters were introduced. I mean, he went ahead and fleshed some of the newer ones from book 2 out, which I thought was really cool. I liked knowing all those backstories and things like that. And there were definitely some world building elements that were added on here just because he was able in this one to answer some of the questions that had been left open-ended for a while for book 1 and 2. So while he didn't answer every question, because there's still one book left in the series, I do feel like he answered at least I think 2 of the main things that you were going, what is this about in the story? And so I thought that was really satisfying and good. It does use a lot of mythology. This one used a lot of Greek mythology, whereas previously there's been a lot of Egyptian mythology in there. So it used a lot of both. It had a lot of Egyptian mythology and a lot of Greek mythology in there, and I found that a really interesting element. I really liked how Tad Williams used that element in the story in terms of what it did for different characters. I have to say that in reading this, I've really come to appreciate the plot structure of how he gets to all the characters in a way where you don't forget what happened to a certain group of characters after a while. I feel like a lot of books with a lot of characters, they talk about a group of characters and then forget to talk about them for 5 chapters, and then when you come back to them, you forgot what happened. And this book and the previous ones don't do that. He times out the chapters so that you remember everything that's happening to everybody, and I think that is a really good skill to have, beyond the fact that his world building is amazing and continues to be amazing. So with every book in this series so far, including this one, I have basically read some of it in print and also read some of it in audiobook. I definitely did that with this time. It's read by the same reader that read the previous 2 books, and I think this reader does an amazing job. I never can remember his name, but he's definitely got some reader skills because this is a very worldwide story with a lot of different dialects and things that he has to do in terms of just male, female characters, different accents from Australia or Britain or, Africa or any of those places, and he does them all with very believable skill. So that continues to be awesome in these books. The only thing I would say in this 3rd book is that some of the descriptions and some of the elements of this book can get really complex. And I bring this up in terms of the audiobook because there are quite a bit more fight scenes, and there are some moments that are very mind-bendy, if you will, because the nature of the virtual network situation in this book. And I will say that it is good to have some kind of copy of this book that you can actually read, at least if you're like me and you're reading the series for the first time, because there were a couple of points where I had to definitely not listen to the audiobook and actually read it in print so I could like fully take in what the scenes were trying to do and what was happening. Definitely want to have like a physical or ebook copy as well as your audiobook copy if you're going to read this book for the first time, I would say, unless you're like really good at like taking things in an auditory manner. This book I thought was really amazing. I'm really excited to see what happens next in the series because this one was so well put together, if you will, and I gave this one 5 stars. Those were my multiple thoughts on these 2 books that I read in April. I hope you guys didn't mind that I got like a little excited / ranty in this video, but you know, I'm hoping that you will still enjoy my thoughts on these books anyway, and I have left some links below, not only to the books, but also to that playlist for Nick and Nora's Infinite Playlist that I talked about. So even though like the book's not my super favorite, and I personally don't like highly recommend it, I do recommend the musical experience I had while reading the book. So you can check that out if you want to. And that is it for today. I will be back soon with my TBR for the month of May. So check that out when that is up. I'm hoping to get that up tomorrow. Thank you for watching, my fabulous peeps, and I will see you all soon.